Everybody, welcome to the parlor. I'm Michelle Reese and I own this vintage beauty parlor. Today we are doing an event with Sylvia, as you all know, and Sylvia is doing her book release for Reviving Joy. Without further ado, I'll send it over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much for coming, and wow, I'm gonna get a little emotional because the reality is I wouldn't be sitting here holding this book of mine if it wasn't for you. I look around and I see so many people who have invested in me and encouraged me and cheered me on, and even just attending this event is just such an encouragement and a blessing. So thank you. I will try not to cry. But yeah, it's really wonderful. So this is a little treasure that I'm so privileged to share with you. I thought I'd choose a piece where the main character, Hannah, finds herself in the prairies. The story begins in Toronto, Canada, and she needs to leave in a quick hurry because she's in an awful relationship and she needs to get away. So she courageously packs her bag and goes across the country and finds herself on a ranch in the middle of the prairies. So it's Sunday on the prairies. Sunday dinners were always a feast on the McBride Ranch. Roasted pork served with vegetables, sweet rolls, and pie for dessert. It was the only day that Hannah didn't have to cook or look after the children. "Set another place at the table, please, Hannah," Marion asked. "Andrew's brother is home for the holidays." Hannah stood back and looked at the beautiful table. She'd collected some boughs of cedar and made a centerpiece to hold a large candle. "It's hard to believe Christmas is only a week away," she said to Marion as they carried food from the kitchen to the dining area. Placing a basket of sweet rolls and a large jug of milk on the table, she went to the living room to get Rosemary and Tabitha. Marion hollered for the boys and the men to come in and wash up for dinner. Hannah helped Rosemary into her chair and sat on the bench next to Tabitha at the table. They played a rhyming game while they waited for the boys to join them. "Sing it with me now, Tabby," Hannah encouraged. "1 apple, 2 apples, 3 and 4. Peel them, cook them, and mash some more. Applesauce, applesauce, it's so yummy. Applesauce, applesauce in my tummy." Hannah tickled Tabitha's tummy, making her giggle and squeal. "Where's my favorite Tabby girl?" She looked up and screamed, "Uncle Bobby!" Hannah recognized the stranger's handsome face. She smiled at the way Tabitha's little arms wrapped around his neck as he swung her around. She noticed his strong, broad shoulders, too. "Hannah, meet my brother Bobby," Andrew announced. "Pleased to meet you," Hannah said as she stood to greet him. He sat Tabitha down next to her daddy and shook her hand. "And you, nice singing." His eyebrows raised and a cheeky, crooked smile made Hannah blush. So far, he'd seen her cry, and he'd heard her singing a silly song. Great first impressions. She stared into his deep blue eyes, which seemed to follow her every move. She lifted one leg over the bench, trying to return to her seat, but underestimated the distance and lost her balance completely. Grabbing for something to keep her from falling, she reached for the table, but slipped and only held the cloth in her hand. Everyone gasped and reached for the moving dishes. Everything began to slide towards Hannah as she tumbled backward in slow motion. "Whoa there," Bobby's deep voice bellowed as he caught Hannah just in time to rescue her from a hard fall. Held underneath her arms with one leg up on the bench and her bottom resting on the floor now, Hannah closed her eyes tightly and prayed she'd disappear. The giggles and laughter all around her eased her pain of humiliation. She felt two strong hands lifting her up from her awkward position and setting her next to Andrew, who patted her on the back and whispered in her ear, "Consider yourself initiated into the family." Hannah let out a nervous belly laugh as she looked around the table at the McBride family. They were all smiling and laughing along with her. "Thank you for catching me, Bobby." "It was the dinner I was saving, lassie." He winked at her and reached for the potatoes. Marion tapped his arm lightly. "Not before we give thanks." "Sorry," Bobby replied. The family held hands as Andrew prayed and gave thanks for all the blessings received. After dinner, the children played games by the fire while the adults made plans for Christmas. So I'll just pause there for a couple of minutes and tell you a little bit about how this story came about. I know you're all sitting on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next, right? And that's not even one of the suspenseful parts, right? That's just a little bit of romance in our vintage parlor today. So this story was an idea that was birthed actually from a fairy tale. Many, many moons ago, my sister who lives out west, she and I are both artists and love to make homemade gifts for each other. And so one year for Christmas, I made her a fairy tale. And it was really, I turned the story of her life into a fairy tale. And then I just, put some pictures to it, put it together and gave it to her as a Christmas gift. And she loved it. And then she challenged me. She said, if you can do this, quickly for a Christmas gift, certainly you can write a novel. And I said, a novel? No way, right? That's like too big, too many words. And she said to me, why don't you just start writing and see what happens? And write until you run out of words. So I thought about it for a few weeks, and then I thought, why don't I just take this fairy tale and elaborate, see what happens. So over the next year, I turned the fairy tale into a novel, and it was 20,000 words and about 15 chapters, and I gave it to her for the next Christmas. And so she was like, holy cow, girl. And I was like, I know, right? I don't know where all these words come from. And so that was that. I gave it to her, and I made a copy for myself. And over the years, these couple of copies got spread around the family. And one by one, family members came to me and said, when's the sequel coming out? And I'm like, oh, no, that was just a gift, right? Well, 3 years ago, I was writing some curriculum and trying to put together a book, and I needed to learn how to self-publish. And I went online, was learning how to self-publish for this curriculum, and the course online kept saying, take your manuscript, and then blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I don't have a manuscript. And about the 6th or 7th time, I was like, oh, I do have a manuscript. So I dug it out of the drawer, and I read it, and I went, this is actually a pretty good story 10 years later. So I thought, if I like it 10 years later, maybe I could turn it into a real book. And so I spent about a year just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, acquiring editors, content editors, and who encouraged me to rewrite and rewrite. And that's really what writing is about. It's about rewriting. So the idea is great, the first draft is wonderful, and then you rewrite until you have no fingernails left. But I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And so here I am today holding, it's now 80,000 words and 28 chapters, and there's a little bit of my artwork in here, just a tiny bit, and which I'll show you here. I just put a handkerchief. So there's a handkerchief theme in the book, and which is why the character's holding a hanky and why we're embroidering hankies today. And I didn't actually notice that theme until my sister, who I love dearly, the artist who I gave the book to, said, oh, I love the handkerchief theme. I was like, oh. I'm a little slow, what can I say? So I will just read a little bit more, if I can find my page back. So they've had dinner, they've gone out, and they've got their Christmas tree, and they're all gathering around the fire to warm up. Now the family was full of anticipation for the rest of the evening events, because you know what happens at Christmas time, right? Hannah and Marion served hot apple cider, shortbread cookies, while Andrew and Bobby successfully planted the tree in the large pot that stood in the corner of the living room. Can we make the popcorn? Jonathan asked. You make it and we'll string it. That is, if you don't eat it all at once, his mother joked. Hannah sat quietly, enjoying the laughter and conversations of the McBride family. It made her more homesick than ever. She would make her way home soon, she decided, and start over again. This time, she would follow her head and not her heart. Bobby sat next to her and handed her a small package with a rose-colored ribbon around it. Hannah took the gift and looked at him with surprise. What's this? She asked. Open it and find out. His eyes twinkled as she smiled at her. He couldn't help but stare into her green eyes. She was beautiful to him. He didn't know much about her, but all he wanted to do was put his arms around her and keep her safe forever. "Oh my," Hannah said softly as she laid the hand-stitched handkerchief on her lap. She ran her fingers over the pink and yellow flowers, studying the intricate embroidery. There was lace sewn around the edges, and the word joy was stitched with blue thread in the bottom right-hand corner. "It's so beautiful, Bobby. Where did you find such a thing?" She was afraid to ask, but it came out of her mouth before she could stop it. Bobby was happy to oblige. "Marion made it for you," he announced. "I asked her to put something special on it, and we decided joy sounded just like you," Bobby said loudly as he winked at his sister-in-law across the room. When Marion saw the handkerchief on Hannah's lap, she smiled at her new young friend. Hannah mouthed the words, "Thank you," to her, and then looked intently into Bobby's eyes. "You didn't have to do this, you know. I didn't get anything for you." "I was hoping to take you for a walk in the moonlight with me. That would be the perfect gift, I think." Bobby stood and put his hand out to hers. "Just a short walk to the barn and back." Hannah couldn't resist his charm. All eyes were on her as she stood and followed the tall cowboy to the door. "Can I come?" Tabitha wanted to know. "Not this time, honey." Bobby ruffled her hair under his large hand. "We'll be back before you know it." Well, Tabitha stuck out her bottom lip and pouted as the door closed behind them. She didn't like being left out of anything. She sat by the door, staring out the window and wishing she could be outside with Hannah and Uncle Bobby. And then there's a very romantic scene in the snow, but you can read that for yourself. Well, you're all such good listeners. This is like back in my teaching days. I wish you were my students.